There have been some reports floating around that Terrace Marshall's medical rechecks did not go well last month. Marshall has had two pretty serious lower body injuries. The first was in high school when he suffered a left ankle fracture dislocation that required surgery. He reportedly suffered a small fracture to the fibula, which is the smaller of two lower leg bones. He had to have a rod and some screws inserted to stabilize that fracture. That alone is not that big of a deal, and usually players can recover within a few months from that injury. His dad did come out and say after that there was no ligament damage, but at the start of the next season, so close to a year later, he still reportedly wasn't 100%. That's not going to be the case if there's just a small fibula fracture. So that makes me believe there was some ligament damage, despite what his dad said, and that could lead to some problems going forward. He then, 2 years later, suffered a right foot fracture that required surgery. I saw one report that the surgery was to his pinky toe. I don't necessarily think it was actually his pinky toe, but I think he could have had a Jones fracture, which is to the fifth metatarsal on the outside of the foot, which leads to the pinky. Don't know for certain that that's the type of fracture, but if so, that is somewhat concerning because it's a type of fracture that often recurs, leads to problems down the road. Sometimes players have to have another surgery to have, the screws removed. That's not that big of a deal, but a lot of the time, that part of the foot doesn't get good blood flow, so it has a hard time healing and getting back to 100%. And if that's the case, it's very possible that Marshall will continue to have a problem with either of those, that left ankle or that right foot. We don't know which side really showed up during his medical recheck as being a problem. Could have been both, could have been just one of them. Players go through x-rays, MRIs, all sorts of, in-depth evaluations to determine if there are any injuries that are still lingering, to look for things that maybe a player didn't know was a problem but could be down the road. And in Marshall's case, something showed up. I think that's going to cause him to slide down draft boards, considering he's had two very serious lower body injuries. As a wide receiver, that's pretty tough. Some team is going to take a flyer on him. He could really pan out, but, going in the first round, pretty risky. We have him in the elevated injury risk category, not quite high risk, because he does seem to be as close as he can be to fully recovered from these injuries. But, there was a red flag in there. We don't know exactly what it was, but it's definitely related to one of these two things, and it could cause a problem once he begins his NFL career.